Imagine standing face to face with a human who isn't quite like us, shorter, thicker, and built like a powerhouse. Their bones twice as dense as ours, their lungs capable of holding more air than today's top athletes, their eyes sharper in the dark. These were the Neanderthals, our ancient rivals, stronger, tougher, and adapted to survive in a brutal Ice Age world filled with mammoths, giant bears, and predators at every turn. But here's the mystery. If they were so powerful, why did they vanish? And could part of them still live on inside us? Picture yourself walking through the frozen plains of Ice Age Europe. The wind slices across your face, snow crunches underfoot, and in the distance you spot a figure, human but not quite. This is a Neanderthal, and your first impression is simple: power. Neanderthals weren't towering giants. In fact, they were shorter than us. On average, they stood about 5 inches, 14 centimeters, shorter than modern humans, though some, like the famous Amud 1, reached nearly 5'10", a height that wouldn't turn any heads today. But what they lacked in height, they more than made up for in raw mass. Fossil evidence reveals they were far heavier and sturdier than us. Neanderthal males averaged about 183 pounds, 83 kilo, while females came in around 146 pounds, 66 kilo, about 20% heavier than Homo sapiens. Why? Because their skeletons were dense, compact, and nearly indestructible. Their bones weren't just thicker, they were sometimes double the weight of ours. Imagine a frame designed not for speed, but for durability and sheer force. Their bodies carried muscles like armor plating. Shoulders, femurs, triceps, arms, and even kneecaps were thick and rugged, leaving no doubt these were Ice Age athletes of the highest order. Researchers suggest their upper bodies could rival modern-day powerlifters. And their strength wasn't just for show, it was survival. When you think of strength, imagine this. Some scientists estimate Neanderthal males could bench press nearly 500 pounds, 200 kilos without training, and females could push 350 pounds, 160 kilo. By today's standards, that's elite powerlifting. To them, it was simply everyday life. Neanderthals weren't built to run marathons or chase prey across endless miles. They were built like living tanks, adapted for close encounters, brutal hunts, and surviving in a world where only the toughest made it through. If Neanderthals were built like tanks, it's because their hunting world demanded nothing less. Forget chasing rabbits or fishing in calm rivers. Neanderthals went after the titans of their age. Woolly mammoths, rhinoceroses, wild horses, and even Ice Age elephants were on their menu. These animals weren't just enormous. They were armored with thick hides, heavy fur, and tusks capable of impaling anyone who got too close. Unlike modern humans, who perfected long-range hunting tools like bows and spears with throwing leverage, Neanderthals fought up close. Their primary weapon was the thrusting spear, massive, heavy, and designed for stabbing at close quarters. Imagine facing down a 10-ton mammoth with nothing but a wooden shaft tipped with stone, knowing you'd have to get close enough to drive it deep into flesh. It was hunting as high risk as it gets. This brutal style of combat shaped their bodies. Constantly driving spears against resistant targets gave them arms almost cartoonishly muscular, Popeye-like, as some researchers describe. These hunts required not just teamwork but raw courage. When a mammoth or rhino turned and charged, survival often came down to whether your body could withstand the impact, or whether your tribe could pull you out before it was too late. The scars of this lifestyle are written in their bones. Studies show that up to 94% of Neanderthal skeletons bear signs of major injuries. Broken bones, crushed limbs, and even amputations weren't rare. They were the price of feeding a tribe. Yet time and again those injuries healed. Neanderthal could lose an arm, a chunk of vision, or even hearing in both ears, and still live on. That alone tells us something astonishing. They weren't just powerful hunters. They were survivors of a world where every meal could cost your life. Hunting giants meant Neanderthals broke, often. Yet what's more impressive than their injuries is how many of them healed. Their skeletons read like medical case studies from a war zone. Fractured skulls, shattered arms, crushed ribs, and torn joints. But here's the incredible part. Most of those wounds knit back together. One famous Neanderthal, known as Shanidar I, lived with injuries that would have killed most modern humans. He had a withered right arm, probably amputated above the elbow. His skull showed damage that left him partly blind, and his hearing was gone in both ears. Add to that a limp from severe leg trauma, and you'd think his story ended early. Yet Shanidar I lived for decades. That means his tribe fed him, protected him, and carried him through life when his body no longer could. Strength for Neanderthals wasn't just muscle, it was community. Even so, their individual durability was astonishing. Their dense bones and powerful frames acted like natural armor, absorbing punishment from hunts, falls, and animal attacks. Think of their lives as constant collision courses, bone against tusk, body against earth, muscle against resistance, and still they endured. But this resilience had its limits. Unlike us, Neanderthals didn't have advanced medicine, no antiseptics, no hospitals. A bad infection, a deep wound, or even just a broken leg at the wrong time could mean the end. What kept them alive as long as they did was their toughness and the loyalty of their clans. So when we picture them as Ice Age titans, it isn't just because of their muscles or raw power. It's because Neanderthals carried the scars of survival and wore them like badges of honor. Every bone tells the story of a species that refused to break, even when the Ice Age tried its hardest to crush them. To understand how Neanderthals survived the Ice Age, you need to imagine a human engine running on overdrive. Their bodies weren't just strong, they were furnaces designed to burn massive amounts of fuel every single day. Take a look at their chests. Unlike our slimmer, tapered rib cages, Neanderthals had wide, barrel-shaped torsos. This gave them enormous lung capacity, which meant they could pull in more oxygen with every breath. Pair that with bigger noses, almost like natural air heaters, and they could warm and humidify freezing air before it reached their lungs. In a world of blizzards and sub-zero nights, this adaptation was life-saving. But those big lungs came at a cost. Fuel. Neanderthals needed more calories than modern humans just to stay alive. Studies suggest they may have required between 4,000 to 6,000 calories per day, more than double the average human diet today. That's the equivalent of eating 20 Big Macs daily, just to keep their engines running. Their diets had to match. Neanderthals were hypercarnivores, meaning up to 80–90% of their food came from meat. Mammoths, rhinos, wild horses, bison, these were their grocery store aisles. Fatty marrow, roasted cuts, and organs packed with nutrients fueled their survival. Without that protein-heavy diet, their massive muscles and oxygen-hungry bodies simply couldn't function. What's fascinating is how their entire biology was shaped by this need. Every bite of food wasn't just fuel. It was the difference between powering a furnace that could survive another brutal winter or starving in the cold. Neanderthals were engines of survival, and those engines never stopped burning. They had no choice, because in the Ice Age, slowing down for even a day could mean the end. When you picture early humans hunting, maybe you imagine them chasing animals for hours, wearing prey down until it collapses from exhaustion. That was the specialty of Homo sapiens, long-distance persistence hunting. But Neanderthals? They were built for something very different. Their stocky frames, short legs, and wide hips gave them incredible power, but little endurance. Think of them less like marathon runners and more like heavyweight sprinters. They didn't chase prey across endless plains, they ambushed it. They exploded into action with short, brutal bursts of speed, closing the distance before the animal had time to react. Scientists believe Neanderthals had a higher proportion of fast-twitch muscle fibers, the kind you see in Olympic sprinters or powerlifters. These muscles deliver explosive strength but tire quickly. Perfect for wrestling a mammoth into submission? Yes. Perfect for chasing it across 20 miles of tundra? Absolutely not. This difference shaped their entire hunting strategy. Neanderthals worked in coordinated groups, hiding in forests or ravines, waiting for a chance to strike. When the moment came, they surged forward, driving spears, clinging to hides, and turning raw strength into survival. But their lack of endurance may have cost them in the long run. As modern humans spread into Europe, our ability to run farther, stalk prey longer, and burn energy more efficiently gave us an edge. Where Neanderthals relied on ambush and brute force, Homo sapiens could play the long game. It wasn't that Neanderthals were less advanced, they were simply specialists. Specialists in a world of sudden violence. where survival hinged on seconds, not hours. In those moments, their bodies gave them everything they needed, raw, unstoppable power. If Neanderthals were living engines, then fire was their spark plug. Without it, all the calories in the world wouldn't have saved them from the brutal Ice Age nights. Fire wasn't just about warmth, it was life support. Archaeological sites show clear evidence of controlled fire use. Hearths dotted their shelters, carefully maintained over time. These weren't casual campfires. They were survival hubs. Around them, Neanderthals cooked meat, softened tough marrow bones, and even roasted plants that would otherwise be indigestible. By cooking food, they unlocked more calories, a necessity for their furnace-like metabolism. Fire also offered something less obvious: energy efficiency. When your body isn't shivering through sub-zero nights, you burn fewer calories just to stay alive. Fire acted as a survival multiplier, allowing Neanderthals to stretch their precious food further. But warmth and calories were only part of the story. Fire gave safety. Imagine facing down Ice Age predators, cave lions, hyenas, bears that prowled the night. A ring of flame kept danger at bay. It gave Neanderthals time to rest, heal, and plan. And perhaps most surprisingly, fire gave them community. Picture a clan huddled close, sharing cooked meat, shadows dancing across cave walls. Stories may have been told, bonds strengthened, injuries soothed. In those flickering circles of light, Neanderthals weren't just surviving, they were living. Still, fire alone couldn't solve the constant pressure of their energy demands. Every day was a cycle of fuel and burn, hunt, eat, recover, repeat. Their engines never stopped running, because in the Ice Age, idleness meant death. For Neanderthals, fire wasn't a luxury. It was the heartbeat of their survival, the one force that kept their powerful bodies from being extinguished by the cold. If you stood face to face with a Neanderthal, you'd notice the muscles first. But behind that heavy brow ridge was something even more surprising: a brain as big, if not bigger, than your own. On average, Neanderthal brains measured around 1,500 cubic centimeters, slightly larger than modern humans. At first glance, that might suggest they were smarter. But brain size alone doesn't tell the whole story. What mattered was how their brains were wired. Researchers believe much of that extra brain volume was devoted to vision and movement. Their massive eyes and powerful bodies demanded more neural processing. That left less room, perhaps, for abstract thinking, creativity, or social networking, the very traits that helped Homo sapiens build complex societies. But don't mistake them for dumb brutes. Neanderthals made sophisticated tools. They crafted stone blades, scrapers, and spears with a level of skill that required planning and precision. Some sites even show evidence of adhesives made from birch bark tar, a kind of prehistoric superglue that required controlled heating and careful preparation. That's chemistry, not chance. Their brains also hint at problem-solving and adaptability. In colder climates, they built shelters from mammoth bones and hides. In resource-scarce areas, they shifted diets to include more plants, nuts, and even seafood. Survival in the Ice Age wasn't simple, and Neanderthals weren't simple either. What's fascinating is this: their brains may have been specialized differently than ours. Where we excel at long-term planning and complex social bonds, Neanderthals excelled at immediate survival, practical skills, and raw adaptation. They weren't failed versions of us. They were a different kind of human intelligence, one molded by an unforgiving world, sharp in ways we often overlook. For a long time, Neanderthals were painted as dull creatures, strong but soulless, surviving without imagination. But the evidence tells a different story. Beneath the weight of their muscles, there was a spark of culture. Archaeologists have uncovered pigments, red ochre, black manganese, that Neanderthals may have used as body paint or for decorating objects. In some caves, there are markings and shapes carved into walls, older than any known Homo sapiens art in Europe. These aren't random scratches. They hint at intention, at meaning, at the beginnings of symbolic thought. Then there are the burials. At sites like Shanidar Cave in Iraq, Neanderthal skeletons were found carefully placed in shallow graves. One individual even appeared to be laid to rest with flowers, though the flower burial remains debated. Still, The care with which bodies were treated suggests something profound. Neanderthals didn't see death as the end of usefulness. They saw meaning in remembering. They also wore ornaments. Eagle talons with cut marks suggest they were strung as necklaces or pendants. Seashells tinted with pigment hint at personal decoration. Jewelry in any form is more than fashion. It's identity, a way of saying I am me, I belong here. Even music may not have been beyond them. A flute-like instrument carved from a bear's bone, discovered in Slovenia, has holes spaced like those on modern wind instruments. If it truly belonged to Neanderthals, it means they may have known melody and rhythm. Imagine the flicker of firelight, the hum of voices, the faint sound of music echoing through a cave. These fragments remind us Neanderthals weren't just surviving. They were reaching in their own way toward something timeless, something human. For thousands of years, Neanderthals thrived across Europe and Western Asia. Then, around 40,000 years ago, they were gone, not with a bang, not overnight, but gradually, until only one kind of human remained: us. But here's the twist: Neanderthals didn't vanish completely. They live on inside us. When modern humans expanded out of Africa, they met Neanderthals. They didn't just compete with them, they connected with them. Genetic evidence shows that humans and Neanderthals interbred many times. Today, if you're of European or Asian descent, about 1 to 2% of your DNA comes directly from Neanderthals. That might sound small, but those fragments matter. Neanderthal genes influence how our immune systems fight disease, how our skin reacts to sunlight, and even our risk for conditions like diabetes or depression. In a very real sense, their survival adaptations are still shaping our lives. Their disappearance, though, is still debated. Did climate shifts shrink their food supply? Did modern humans outcompete them with longer endurance, larger social networks, and more flexible technology? Or were they simply absorbed into us through interbreeding, their identity fading but their bloodline continuing? The truth may be all of the above. What's undeniable is that Neanderthals weren't failures. They thrived for over 300,000 years in some of the harshest environments Earth has ever seen. By comparison, Homo sapiens have barely scratched 200,000 years so far. So the next time you look in the mirror, remember, the shadow of the Ice Age still stares back. Your bones, your immune system, even parts of your brain, all whisper of ancestors who were strong, resilient, and profoundly human. Neanderthals never truly disappeared. They're in us. And through us, their story continues.